There are wounds no one sees, not because they are hidden, but because they exist where no one is allowed to look. My father never raised his hand at me. He never shouted. He never disowned me. He did something far more lasting. He never forgave me. And inside the palace, silence carries more weight than punishment. I grew up believing my father was unshakable, a man of composure, of authority, of control. In his presence, the room always felt smaller, not because he demanded space, but because his expectations filled it. I learned very early that love in our world was measured differently. It was not spoken. It was demonstrated through approval, through acknowledgement, through trust. And when those things were withdrawn, no explanation was given. Inside the palace, fathers do not argue with their sons. They evaluate them. Every word I spoke was weighed. Every choice I made remembered. Every hesitation recorded. I was not being raised. I was being assessed. And for a long time, I believed I was passing. My father taught me discipline before he taught me affection, responsibility before reassurance, silence before expression. He believed restraint built strength, that emotions weakened judgment, that forgiveness encouraged disobedience. So when I disappointed him, not through rebellion, but through humanity, he did not correct me. He withdrew. The mistake I made was not dramatic. It wasn't scandal. It wasn't betrayal. It was choice. I questioned something that mattered deeply to him. I expressed doubt where certainty was expected. I chose honesty where obedience would have been safer. In a normal family, that would have been a conversation. In a palace, it was a fracture. I remember the moment I realized forgiveness would never come. It was subtle. A look that no longer lingered. A conversation that never resumed. A distance that quietly settled between us and never left. No confrontation, no explanation, just absence. People assume that when fathers are powerful, their approval comes easily. The truth is the opposite. Approval becomes currency, forgiveness becomes leverage, and love becomes conditional. I tried to fix it. I corrected my posture, softened my tone, measured my words more carefully than ever before. I waited for acknowledgement. It never came, because forgiveness in his world was not about healing. It was about control. Inside the palace, admitting fault is not enough. You must realign. You must become predictable again, safe again, useful again. I could not do that without disappearing, and he knew it. The silence between us grew heavier with time. We stood in the same rooms, shared the same air, but something essential was gone. He no longer saw me as a son learning. He saw me as a deviation. And deviations are not embraced, they are managed. I watched how he spoke to others, warm, measured, controlled. Then I watched how he spoke to me, formal, brief, distant. That contrast hurt more than anger ever could. Forgiveness is not always denied loudly. Sometimes it is denied by never reopening the door. And I spent years standing in front of one that never moved. I questioned myself constantly. Was I wrong to speak? Wrong to feel? Wrong to want more than I was allowed? That is the danger of growing up without forgiveness. You begin to believe that love must be earned repeatedly and can be revoked permanently. I learned to carry disappointment quietly, to lower my expectations, to detach emotionally, because hoping for reconciliation hurt more than accepting distance. My father never explained why forgiveness was impossible. He didn't need to. In his world, authority does not justify itself, and understanding was never offered, only compliance. What people don't understand is that sons in palaces are not allowed to fail publicly. Failure reflects on legacy, on stability, on image. So when I stepped outside expectation, I became a reminder of vulnerability. And vulnerability is something power does not tolerate. I stopped trying to be forgiven, not because I stopped caring, but because I realized forgiveness was being used as a test, a test of submission, and I could not pass that without losing myself. The absence of forgiveness changes you. It teaches you to rely on your own validation, to build identity without approval, to survive emotional coldness with internal warmth. But it also leaves scars, invisible ones. There were moments I still hoped, moments I imagined reconciliation, a conversation, an acknowledgement, a simple gesture that said, "I see you." Those moments faded slowly. I learned that not every father knows how to love without conditions. Some love through structure, through expectation, through control. And when that control is challenged, love retreats. The hardest truth I accepted was this: he did not hate me. He simply valued authority more than connection. And forgiveness threatened that authority. That realization freed me. Not from pain, but from illusion. I stopped waiting for something that was never coming. And in that acceptance, I found peace. I no longer seek forgiveness that requires self-erasure. I no longer confuse silence with strength, and I no longer measure my worth by approval withheld as punishment. My father never forgave me, and I no longer need him to. Because forgiveness that demands obedience is not healing, it is control. This is not a story of resentment. It is a story of release, of understanding that some people cannot give what they were never taught, and that walking forward without forgiveness is sometimes the bravest choice. I honor where I come from, but I refuse to disappear within it, because legacy should not cost your humanity, and love should not require silence. My father never forgave me, but I forgave myself, and that changed everything. I didn't forgive myself immediately. That part took time, because when you grow up seeking approval from someone who never gives it freely, you internalize their silence as truth. You begin to believe that if forgiveness is withheld, guilt must be permanent. I carried that guilt quietly for years, not because I believed I was wrong, but because I was trained to believe that disappointing authority is the same as failing as a person. That belief settles deep. It follows you into every decision, every relationship, every moment where you hesitate before trusting yourself. Inside the palace, fathers are not meant to apologize. They are meant to be correct. And sons are not meant to be understood. They are meant to adapt. I adapted for a long time. I adjusted my expectations downward. I learned to speak only when necessary. I learned to exist in the presence of emotional absence without demanding explanation. That became my survival skill. But survival is not the same as living. And one day I realized something unsettling. I no longer felt anger toward my father. I felt distance. And distance, unlike anger, does not ask to be resolved. There were moments when I stood across from him and wondered if he noticed the change in me, if he sensed that the son who once waited for approval had grown into someone who no longer expected it. But if he did notice, he never acknowledged it. Acknowledgement would have required vulnerability, and vulnerability was never his language. People assume forgiveness heals the person who made the mistake. But sometimes forgiveness heals the one who is denied it, because being unforgiven forces you to confront who you are without validation. It strips away illusion. It leaves you alone with yourself. And in that solitude, you either disappear or you become solid. I became solid slowly. I began trusting my own judgment, valuing my own integrity, standing by decisions even when they were not celebrated, not defiantly, quietly. I stopped waiting for emotional permission to move forward, stopped pausing my life at the door of a man who had already closed it. That was the moment I truly stepped out of his shadow. My father and I still exist in the same world. We still share history, we still share blood, but we no longer share expectation. And that separation, painful as it was, became necessary. I learned that some fathers cannot forgive because forgiveness feels like surrender. and surrender in their minds feels like weakness. They were taught to lead, not to heal, to command, not to connect, to be respected, not to be understood. Understanding that did not erase the hurt, but it replaced resentment with clarity, and clarity is a quieter kind of peace. I no longer define myself by what I failed to be in his eyes. I define myself by what I refuse to lose in my own, my honesty, my conscience, my humanity. There is a strange freedom in accepting that some relationships will never be repaired. Because once you stop trying to fix what cannot be fixed, you are free to build what still can be. I built a different kind of strength, one that does not rely on approval, one that does not shrink under silence, one that does not confuse authority with love. My father never forgave me, but he gave me something else, unintentionally. He showed me what happens when power replaces empathy, and that lesson shaped the man I chose to become. I choose to listen where he remained silent. I choose to understand where he withdrew. I choose to forgive where he could not because I am better, but because I refuse to pass the same wound forward. This story is not about blame. It is about acceptance, about recognizing that not every parent knows how to love beyond control, and that sometimes the absence of forgiveness is not a reflection of your failure, but of their limitation. I no longer wait for him to meet me emotionally. I meet myself there, and that has been enough. My father never forgave me, but I learned to stand without it. And in doing so, I finally became someone I could respect with or without his approval.